said you're new here at UVM.
Yes.
So you're coming from California, Santa Barbara, is that right?
Yeah, I came most recently from University of California, Santa Barbara. And the work there was inspired by a group of people who study biodiversity coming together. I worked at a organization called NCES, which is the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. And they pretty much sponsor big groups of people to come together and work on questions like this. They sort of wanted an outsider to question them to some degree about, is biodiversity really important? Because I was sort of a skeptic. What we were really interested in is trying to figure out if biodiversity affects the ability of ecosystems to perform the way we want them to be productive, that is, to grow a lot. So why might you care about that? You might care about that if, for example, you have a grassland that you want to provide forage for cattle, for example. You want those plants to grow a lot so the cattle have a lot to eat. So we decided to write this paper to try to figure that out, and what we found out, which for some reason surprised us, was that it does have an impact on ecosystems, things like productivity, how much plants grow in a year, being productivity, has the same amount of impact on that as things like warming and acidification and nitrogen pollution.
How do you make a comparison like that across so many diverse systems to try and come up with a metric by which you can even start to estimate the effects of something like species loss?
You just take every paper you can find, essentially, that addresses the question, for example, does warming increase or decrease productivity? And you kind of get a yes-no answer to that and average the size of the effect across all of those different studies to get a value. And then we did the same thing with a huge biodiversity database. So all of the data we could find out there on biodiversity loss. To estimate the size of the effect of losing species, losing 25% of the species, 50% of the species, or 100% of the species, to see where that fell out, in terms of comparing it to the effect of warming or increasing nitrogen availability.
One of the conclusions you had that I thought was pretty interesting was you saw a big effect on changes in species on the amount of primary production, but not so much of a change in terms of decomposition. So the decomposition rates would stay the same, but the production rates would decline.
Right.
Is that what I take away?
Yeah, so that is essentially looking at the plant diversity. So as plant diversity declines, productivity declines pretty dramatically. A 50% species loss is sort of similar to acidification or acid rain falling on a forest, for example. 100% species loss is like a really severe drought.
And you're comparing in terms of the order of magnitude of the impact.
Yeah, sort of the order of magnitude of the effect on productivity. Whereas losing litter species types, like litter diversity, once the leaves fall off the tree, how many species there are on the ground decomposing, really had very little impact on decomposition. Something that was interesting, though, was that the diversity of the things doing the decomposing did have a larger impact on decomposition. So if you have a really diverse soil community decomposing litter, then decomposition goes faster.
So you were compiling studies on plant diversity, but then also on the diversity of invertebrates in the soil. Yeah. Did you get down to the level of bacteria or anything?
Yeah, we were using microbial communities and then also like mesofauna. So that's another thing that sort of came out of this paper, is that we really need to expand our view of ecosystem services and how decomposition affects those. For example, like it would be really nice to know how diversity affects the ability of forests to purify water. If we can have more productive systems in general, we can take more carbon out of the atmosphere and mitigate climate change, we hope. Reduce the effects of global warming, for example. Some of the next steps are trying to define what biodiversity means for these other ecosystem services. There's definitely still work that needs to be done, moving away from just productivity and focusing on these other aspects of ecosystem services that people really care about.